The blazing sun overhead made Abigail Barton's throat dry as dust, but she refused to stop her journey along the narrow trail that snaked across the New Mexico territory. The year was 1885, and at 23 years old, she was determined to reach Albuquerque before nightfall, despite the warnings about traveling alone. Her chestnut mare, Penny, plodded steadily beneath her, hooves crunching on the sun-baked earth as the distant mesas shimmered in the heat. "Just a few more hours, girl," Abigail murmured, patting Penny's neck. The saddlebags containing all her worldly possessions, including her late father's pocket watch and the deed to her uncle's store, hung heavy at her sides. Abigail adjusted her wide-brimmed hat, squinting at the horizon where the trail disappeared between two rocky outcroppings. The landscape was beautiful in its harsh red rocks, scrubby juniper, and endless blue sky, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She'd been traveling for 3 days since leaving Santa Fe, where the stagecoach had deposited her. The remainder of the journey to Albuquerque had to be made on horseback, as the next stage wouldn't depart for another week, and Abigail couldn't afford to wait. Her Uncle Walter was dying. His letter, delivered 3 weeks ago to her boarding house in Boston, had been brief but clear. The consumption was taking him quickly, and if she wanted the general store he'd promised to leave her one chance at independence, she needed to arrive before he passed. The sound of hoofbeats in the distance made her sit up straight, riders approaching fast from behind. Abigail's heart quickened, and she urged Penny to a slightly faster pace, though she knew outrunning anyone in this heat would be impossible. When the 3 riders appeared around the bend behind her, she kept her eyes forward, hoping they would simply pass by. Instead, they slowed as they approached, spreading out across the narrow trail to block any chance of her moving forward. "Whoa there, miss," called the man in the center, a tall, wiry fellow with a scar running down his left cheek. His smile revealed tobacco-stained teeth beneath a drooping mustache. "Ain't safe for a lady to be riding these trails alone." Abigail kept her expression neutral, though her right hand inched toward the small derringer hidden in her skirt pocket, a parting gift from her father's friend, before she'd left Boston. "I appreciate your concern, gentlemen, but I'm nearly to my destination," she replied, keeping her voice steady despite the fear building in her chest. "That's a mighty fine horse you got there," said the man on the left, younger than the others, with a pockmarked face and eager eyes that studied her saddlebags. "And I reckon those bags ain't filled with just ladies' underthings." The third man, heavyset with a filthy bandana around his neck, chuckled. "We're just offering to escort you, madam. These parts can be dangerous. For a small fee, of course." "I have very little money," Abigail said truthfully. Most of her savings had gone toward the journey west. "Then we'll take whatever you do have," said the scarred man, dropping all pretense of politeness. His hand moved to the revolver at his hip, including that pretty necklace. Abigail's fingers instinctively touched the silver locket containing a miniature portrait of her parents. "This has no value to anyone but me. We'll be the judge of that," the younger man said, dismounting and approaching her horse. "Now, why don't you climb down so we can have a proper look at your belongings?" Abigail's mind raced. The derringer had only 2 shots, 3 men. Bad odds. "I said get down," the man repeated, his hand reaching for Penny's bridle. A gunshot cracked through the air and all 3 men froze. The bullet had struck the ground inches from the young man's boot. "The lady doesn't appear interested in your company," came a deep voice from atop the ridge to their right. Abigail looked up to see a lone rider on a magnificent black stallion, silhouetted against the bright sky. He held a Winchester rifle aimed at the would-be robbers, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. "This ain't your business, mister," called the scarred man, though his hand hovered uncertainly over his gun. "I'm making it my business," the stranger replied, guiding his horse down the slope with remarkable ease. As he approached, Abigail could see him more clearly, tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes as blue as the New Mexico sky. A badge glinted on his vest. "Marshal Zachary Zimmerman, and you boys are on the wrong side of the law." The heavy-set man spat on the ground. "There's 3 of us and 1 of you, Marshal." "Poor odds," Zachary agreed calmly. "For you." He worked the lever of his rifle, chambering another round. "I've got 15 more bullets here, and I rarely miss. So you can take your chances, or you can ride away with your lives. Your choice." A tense silence followed as the 3 men exchanged glances. The marshal's reputation had clearly preceded him, as the scarred man finally nodded to his companions. "We were just leaving," he said, backing his horse away. "No harm done. Ride north," Zachary ordered, "and don't stop until sundown. If I see you on these trails again, I won't be so generous with my warnings." The 3 men turned their horses and galloped away, dust billowing behind them. Abigail released the breath she'd been holding, her hands trembling slightly as she loosened her grip on Penny's reins. "Thank you, Marshal," she said when she found her voice again. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." Zachary slung his rifle back into its scabbard and urged his stallion closer. Up close, she could see the weariness in his face, the fine lines around his eyes that spoke of years squinting in the harsh sun. "Those men have been causing trouble all along the trail to Albuquerque," he explained. "I've been tracking them for 2 days. May I ask what brings a lady like yourself out here alone, Miss?" "Barton. Abigail Barton," she replied. "I'm traveling to Albuquerque to see my uncle. He's ill." Zachary nodded, studying her with an intensity that made her both uncomfortable and oddly reassured. "That's still a good 3 hours' ride from here, and the sun will be setting soon. These trails aren't safe after dark." "I don't have much choice," Abigail said. "My uncle may not have much time left." The marshal seemed to consider this, then made a decision. "I'll escort you to town. Those men might circle back once they think I've moved on." Relief washed over Abigail, though she was careful not to show too much of it. A woman traveling alone learned quickly not to appear vulnerable, even to those offering help. "That's very kind of you, Marshal. I wouldn't want to delay your pursuit." "They'll keep for another day," he said, a hint of a smile softening his weathered features. "Besides, getting you safely to town is more important right now." As they set off together down the trail, Abigail couldn't help stealing glances at her rescuer. There was something compelling about Marshal Zimmerman, beyond his timely appearance, a quiet confidence, a strength that seemed to run deeper than his impressive physical presence. "You're not from around here," he observed after they'd ridden in silence for a while. "Is it that obvious?" Abigail asked, adjusting her hat against the relentless sun. "Boston, if I had to guess. Your accent gives you away." Abigail smiled despite herself. "You have a good ear, Marshal. And what brings a Boston lady all the way to New Mexico territory? Family ties only explain so much." She hesitated, unsure how much to reveal to this stranger. Yet something about his steady presence encouraged honesty. "My uncle owned a general store in Albuquerque. He has no children, and I have no parents. He wrote offering me the chance to take over the business when he—" She trailed off, then straightened her shoulders. "It's an opportunity for independence I wouldn't find in Boston." Zachary nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The West offers second chances to many, though it's not always kind to those unprepared for its harshness." "I'm tougher than I look, Marshal," Abigail replied, a hint of pride in her voice. "I don't doubt that, Miss Barton," he said, and she was surprised to see genuine respect in his expression. Anyone who'd make this journey alone has grit. As they continued toward Albuquerque, the landscape began to change subtly. The distant mountains took on a purple hue as the afternoon sun slanted across the land. Zachary pointed out landmarks: an old Spanish mission, abandoned years ago, a natural spring where travelers could find water, the distant smoke from the settlement they were approaching. Abigail found herself drawn into conversation with this taciturn lawman. He spoke sparingly but thoughtfully about the territory, its people, the mix of cultures that had shaped this land long before either of them had arrived. "How long have you been a marshal?" she asked as they navigated a rocky section of trail. 5 years officially," he replied. "Before that, I rode with the Texas Rangers for a spell. Came north after the war." "The Civil War?" Abigail asked, surprised. He didn't seem old enough. A shadow crossed his face. "Caught the tail end of it. Joined up at 16, though I told them I was 18. Saw enough to know I never wanted to see more." Abigail nodded, understanding his reluctance to elaborate. The war had left its mark on so many, including her own father, who'd never fully recovered from his wounds. "And what about before Boston?" Zachary asked, changing the subject. "You mentioned no parents." "They died of influenza when I was 18, she said. "I've been teaching at a girls' school since then. It was respectable work, but not what you wanted for your life," he finished for her. Their eyes met briefly, and Abigail felt an unexpected connection, the recognition of someone who understood the desire for something more, something different. "No," she agreed softly. "Not what I wanted." As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Abigail began to make out the scattered buildings of Albuquerque in the distance. Relief mingled with apprehension. She would soon know whether she'd arrived in time, whether the long journey had been worth it. "Your uncle," Zachary said as if reading her thoughts. "What's his name?" "Walter Simmons. He owns the general store on Main Street," Zachary finished, his expression turning grave. "I know Walter." Something in his tone made Abigail's heart sink. "He's gone, isn't he?" The marshal looked at her directly, compassion in his eyes. "He was still holding on this morning when I left town. Doc Jenkins was with him. Walter's a fighter, has been ever since I've known him." Hope flickered in Abigail's chest. "Then we should hurry." Zachary nodded, and they urged their horses to a faster pace, the town growing larger as they approached. Albuquerque was larger than Abigail had expected, though still modest compared to Boston. Adobe buildings lined the dusty streets, interspersed with wooden structures. People moved about their businesswomen carrying water from the well, men loading wagons, children playing in the fading light. A few curious glances followed them as Zachary led her down the main street toward a 2-story building with Simmons General Merchandise painted across its wooden facade. A bell jingled as they entered the store. The interior was dimly lit but well organized, shelves stocked with everything from foodstuffs to tools to fabric. A heavy-set woman with graying hair looked up from behind the counter, her tired eyes widening when she saw Abigail. "You must be Walter's niece," she said, coming around to greet them. "I'm Martha Jenkins, the doctor's wife. I've been minding the store while." She gestured upward toward what Abigail assumed were living quarters above the shop. "Is he?" Abigail couldn't finish the question. "Still with us," Martha assured her. "Though very weak. The doctor's with him now. You've come just in time, my dear." Abigail glanced at Zachary, gratitude in her eyes. If he hadn't rescued her on the trail, if they'd been delayed. "Go on up," the marshal said gently. "I'll see to your horse." "Thank you," Abigail whispered, impulsively touching his arm before following Martha to a narrow staircase at the back of the store. The upstairs apartment was small but comfortable, with a sitting area, a tiny kitchen, and a bedroom where Abigail could see a doctor bent over a bed. The air smelled of medicinal herbs and sickness. "Walter," Martha called softly, "your niece is here. Abigail's come all the way from Boston." The doctor, a thin man with spectacles and kind eyes, straightened and motioned for Abigail to approach. In the bed lay a man she barely recognized from her childhood memories. Uncle Walter had been robust once, with a booming laugh and boundless energy. The figure before her now was gaunt, his skin sallow, his breathing labored. But when his eyes opened and found hers, a spark of the uncle she remembered returned. "Abby," he whispered, his voice a mere thread. "You came." Abigail moved to his side, taking his frail hand in hers. "Of course I came, Uncle Walter." A ghost of a smile crossed his lips. "You look like your mother." Tears stung Abigail's eyes as she sat beside him. "I left as soon as I received your letter. I'm sorry it took so long." Walter shook his head slightly. "You're here now, that's what matters." He paused, gathering strength. "The store, it's yours, the papers." "In my desk. Everything's arranged." "Don't worry about that now," Abigail said, squeezing his hand. "Just rest." "No," Walter insisted, his voice growing clearer with determination. "Need to say this. The store is profitable. Community needs it. People here are good. They'll help you." His eyes searched hers. "Will you stay, make a life here?" Abigail nodded, her throat tight. "Yes, Uncle, I'll stay." Relief washed over Walter's features. "Good, good." His eyes drifted closed for a moment, then opened again. "One more thing. Trust Zimmerman. Good man, best in the territory." Abigail thought of the marshal who'd escorted her safely to town, who was even now seeing to her horse. "I will." Walter seemed satisfied with this, his breathing slowing as exhaustion overtook him. The doctor gently indicated that Abigail should step back. "He needs rest, doctor." Jenkins said quietly, "It's remarkable he's held on this long. I believe he was waiting for you." Martha led Abigail back to the sitting room, where a small fire burned in the hearth despite the warm evening. "I'll prepare some food for you, child. You must be famished after your journey." Abigail nodded gratefully, though food was the furthest thing from her mind. The reality of her situation was setting in. She was thousands of miles from everything familiar, about to inherit a business she knew little about, in a town where she knew no one except her dying uncle. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Martha answered it to reveal Marshal Zimmerman, hat in hand. "I've seen to Miss Barton's horse," he said. "She's been fed and watered at the livery." "Thank you, Zachary," Martha said. "Won't you stay for supper?" "I'm just putting something together for Abigail." The marshal hesitated, his eyes finding Abigail's. "I wouldn't want to intrude on a family time." "Please stay," Abigail said, surprising herself with the request. "Uncle Walter mentioned you just now. He told me to trust you." Something flickered in Zachary's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or recognition. He nodded slowly. "If you're sure." Martha bustled about the small kitchen, producing a simple but hearty meal of beans, cornbread, and dried apple pie. They ate at the small table, speaking in hushed tones so as not to disturb Walter in the next room. The doctor came and went, checking on his patient and assuring Abigail that her uncle was resting comfortably. As the evening wore on, Zachary told Abigail more about Albuquerque, its people, its economy, the challenges and opportunities it presented. She was grateful for the information, storing away details that would help her navigate her new life. "Walter's store is the heart of the community," Zachary explained. "People come from miles around, not just for supplies but for news, for company." He extended credit when folks needed it, donated to the school, organized the Christmas celebration. "He sounds like he was well loved," Abigail said. Zachary corrected gently. "Don't count your uncle out yet. He's surprised us before." But when Dr. Jenkins emerged from the bedroom after midnight, his expression told them what words couldn't. Walter Simmons had slipped away peacefully in his sleep, knowing his niece had arrived safely to carry on his legacy. The next few days passed in a blur for Abigail. The funeral was held just 2 days after her arrival, attended by what seemed like the entire town. Person after person approached her with stories about her uncle's kindness, his fair dealings, his contributions to the community. Many expressed relief that the store would remain open under her management, and offers of help poured in from all sides. Through it all, Marshal Zimmerman remained a steady presence. He helped with arrangements, introduced her to townspeople she needed to know, and somehow managed to keep the store running with Martha's assistance while Abigail dealt with the immediate aftermath of her uncle's death. On the 3rd evening after the funeral, Abigail found herself alone in the store after closing time, taking inventory and trying to make sense of her uncle's bookkeeping system. The bell over the door jingled, and she looked up to see Zachary entering, carrying a small package. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said, removing his hat. "I thought you might be hungry." The package contained fresh bread, cheese, and sliced ham from the hotel restaurant, the first real food Abigail had seen all day. She realized suddenly that she was indeed starving. "That's very thoughtful of you," she said, clearing a space on the counter. "Will you join me?" They shared the impromptu meal as darkness fell outside, the store illuminated by the warm glow of oil lamps. For the first time since arriving, Abigail felt herself truly relaxing in the marshal's company. "I caught those men," Zachary said after a comfortable silence. "The ones who tried to rob you on the trail." Abigail looked up in surprise. "When?" "Yesterday." They were foolish enough to try the same routine with a rancher's wife south of town. Unfortunately for them, she was a better shot than they expected. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "She winged the youngest one, made them much easier to track." "Will they go to jail?" "They'll stand trial next week when the circuit judge comes through. But with multiple witnesses, I'd say their future involves a lengthy stay behind bars." Abigail studied him, noting the satisfaction in his expression. "You enjoy your work, don't you?" Zachary considered the question. "Enjoy might not be the right word. I believe in it. There needs to be order even out here, especially out here." He met her gaze directly. "What about you? Will you stay and run the store as you told Walter?" "I gave my word," Abigail said simply. "And in truth, I have nothing to return to in Boston, but I know little about running a business, especially one so important to a community." "You'll learn," Zachary said with surprising conviction. "Your uncle wouldn't have left it to you if he didn't believe you could handle it." His confidence warmed her. "Thank you for that, and for everything you've done these past days. I don't know how I would have managed without your help." "Neighbors look after each other here," he replied. "It's how we survive." "Is that all we are, neighbors?" The words slipped out before Abigail could stop them, surprising even herself with their boldness. Zachary's eyes darkened, and for a moment, she thought she'd overstepped. But then he smiled a real smile that transformed his usually serious face. "I'd like to think we could be friends, Miss Barton, if you're amenable." "I'd like that," she said softly. "And please call me Abigail." "Abigail," he repeated, the name sounding different in his deep voice. "Then you must call me Zach. Only officials and outlaws call me Marshal Zimmerman." Their conversation continued late into the evening, moving from business matters to personal histories. Zachary told her about growing up in Pennsylvania, his service during the war, and how he drifted west afterward, seeking something he couldn't name until he found his calling in law enforcement. Abigail shared stories of her childhood in Boston, her parents' deaths, and her years teaching at the girls' school a respectable position that had slowly suffocated her spirit. "I never thought I'd end up here," she admitted, gesturing to the store around them. "But now that I am, it feels right somehow, like I was meant to come west." "The territory has that effect on people," Zachary said. "It either drives them away within a month or claims them forever." "And which were you?" she asked. His eyes met hers. "I knew the first day I'd never leave." When he finally departed, promising to return the following day to help her with a shipment of goods arriving from Santa Fe, Abigail found herself standing in the doorway watching his tall figure disappear down the darkened street. A strange feeling settled in her chest, not quite homesickness, not quite excitement, but something in between. A sense that her life had changed irrevocably, and not just because of her uncle's passing. The next weeks brought a steep learning curve as Abigail took full control of the store. She discovered her uncle had been a meticulous record keeper, which made understanding the business easier than expected. The townspeople were patient with her mistakes and generous with their advice. Mrs. Mendoza from the bakery taught her about extending credit to trustworthy customers. Mr. Chen, who ran the laundry, showed her how to bargain with traveling salesmen. And old Tom Wilson, who'd been friends with her uncle for 30 years, shared stories of the store's history while helping her organize the storeroom. But it was Zachary who proved the most reliable ally. Though his duties often took him away from town, he made a point of stopping by the store whenever he returned. Sometimes he brought small gifts, a book he thought she might enjoy, fresh fruit from a farmer's orchard, a handcrafted bookmark made by one of the Pueblo women. Other times, he simply offered conversation and companionship after long days of work. Abigail found herself looking forward to these visits with increasing anticipation. She learned to recognize the sound of his footsteps on the wooden sidewalk, the particular way he knocked on the door after closing time. Their friendship deepened as summer turned to fall, conversations extending beyond the practical matters of business and town affairs to more personal topics. One crisp October evening, nearly 3 months after her arrival in Albuquerque, Zachary invited her to the harvest festival being held at the edge of town. "The whole community will be there," he explained. "Music, dancing, food. It would be a good opportunity for you to meet some of the outlying families who only come to town occasionally." "That sounds wonderful," Abigail replied, trying to ignore the flutter in her stomach at the idea of attending a social event with the marshal. "Though I'm not sure I have anything appropriate to wear." "You look fine just as you are," Zachary said, then flushed slightly. "But if you're concerned, Mrs. Mendoza's daughter is quite the seamstress. She might be able to help with short notice." And so it was that Abigail found herself, 3 days later, wearing a new calico dress with a lace collar as Zachary escorted her to the festival grounds just beyond the town limits. Lanterns hung from trees, casting a warm glow over long tables laden with food. A small band played lively tunes, and couples already swirled and danced while children chased each other through the gathering twilight. Abigail was introduced to dozens of people ranchers and their families from the surrounding countryside, travelers passing through, old-timers who remembered the town before it had a proper church. She felt a growing sense of belonging as she was welcomed into conversation after conversation. No longer just Walter's niece from back east, but Miss Abigail who runs the general store. As the evening progressed, Zachary remained attentive at her side, though his duties as marshal occasionally pulled him away to settle minor disputes or help locate lost children. During one such absence, Abigail found herself chatting with Mrs. Mendoza and several other townswomen. "The marshal certainly pays you special attention," observed Mrs. Chen with a knowing smile. More than his position requires, I think. Abigail felt her cheeks warm. He's been very helpful since my arrival. I'm grateful for his friendship. Friendship, repeated Mrs. Wilson, exchanging glances with the other women. Is that what they're calling it these days? Zachary Zimmerman has never escorted any woman to a social gathering in the 5 years he's been marshal, Mrs. Mendoza added. Not until you arrived, Querida. Before Abigail could respond, the man himself returned, offering her a cup of cider. The women dispersed with knowing looks that made Abigail's blush deepen. Have I missed something? Zachary asked, noting her flustered expression. Just women being women, Abigail replied, taking a sip of the sweet cider. Making mountains of molehills. Zachary looked as though he might press for details, but the band struck up a lively reel and couples began forming lines for the dance. Would you care to dance? He asked instead, offering his hand. Abigail hesitated only briefly. I'd like that very much. She'd never considered Zachary a graceful man. His strength and solidity were his defining physical traits, but on the dance floor, he moved with surprising ease. His hand at her waist was steady, his steps confident as they joined the other couples in the spirited dance. You dance well for a lawman, Abigail remarked, slightly breathless as they turned. My mother insisted all her sons learn, he replied, a rare reference to his family. Said no Zimmerman would embarrass her at social gatherings. How many brothers do you have? She asked, realizing how little she knew of his family despite their growing closeness. 2. Both back in Pennsylvania. William runs the family hardware store and James teaches at the college. His expression grew pensive. We write occasionally, but I haven't seen them in years. You miss them? The question seemed to surprise him. I suppose I do, though our paths diverged long ago. The music changed to a slower waltz and couples around them drew closer. Zachary's hand tightened slightly at Abigail's waist, his other hand warm around hers. And what about you? He asked as they moved in gentle circles. Do you miss Boston? The life you left behind? Abigail considered the question seriously. I miss certain aspects, the libraries, the concerts, old friends. But no, I don't miss my life there. It feels distant now, like it belonged to someone else. And this life, here in Albuquerque, does it suit you better? She looked up at him, at the genuine interest in his blue eyes, and felt a surge of certainty. Yes. Despite everything arriving just in time to lose Uncle Walter, having to learn a business from scratch, being so far from everything familiar, I feel more myself here than I ever did back east. Something in Zachary's expression softened. I'm glad to hear it. The town would be poorer without you. The town? Abigail asked, feeling suddenly bold in the magic of the evening. Or you, Marshal? His steps faltered slightly, then steadied. Both, he admitted quietly. Definitely both. The music ended, but they remained standing close together, the moment stretching between them until someone called Zachary's name. He reluctantly turned to see the mayor gesturing for him. Duty calls, he said with regret. Will you be all right for a few minutes? Of course, Abigail assured him. I'm quite capable of entertaining myself. As Zachary walked away, Abigail wandered toward the refreshment table, her mind whirling with the implications of their exchange. She'd been fighting her growing feelings for the marshal for weeks, telling herself it was merely gratitude and admiration. But tonight, with his hand warm at her waist and his eyes intent on hers, she could no longer deny the truth. She was falling in love with Zachary Zimmerman. The realization both thrilled and terrified her. She'd come west for independence, for a chance to build a life on her own terms. Emotional entanglements hadn't been part of the plan, and yet, Miss Barton, just the person I hoped to see. Abigail turned to find Mr. Patterson, the bank manager, approaching with a young man she didn't recognize. "Allow me to introduce my nephew, Edward Patterson, recently arrived from Chicago. Edward, this is Miss Abigail Barton, who runs our general store." Edward, handsome in a polished way, with fashionable clothes and meticulously groomed hair, bowed slightly. "A pleasure to meet you, Miss Barton. My uncle speaks highly of you." "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Patterson," Abigail replied automatically, her thoughts still with Zachary. "Edward is considering investing in some business ventures in town," the older Patterson explained. "I thought you two might have much in common, both being newcomers from the East." What followed was a transparent attempt at matchmaking, with the elder Patterson excusing himself and the younger launching into an account of his journey west. Edward was pleasant enough, and under different circumstances, Abigail might have enjoyed his cultured conversation. But her eyes kept drifting to where Zachary stood with the mayor and other town officials, his tall figure unmistakable even at a distance. "Miss Barton," Edward's voice recaptured her attention. "I asked if you might do me the honor of the next dance." Before Abigail could respond, Zachary materialized at her side. "I'm afraid Miss Barton promised this dance to me," he said, his tone cordial but firm. "Perhaps another time, Mr. Patterson." Edward looked between them, a knowing smile tugging at his lips. "Of course, Marshal. Another time." As Zachary led her back to the dance floor, Abigail raised an eyebrow. "I don't recall promising you the next dance." "My apologies for the presumption," he replied, not sounding particularly apologetic. "Would you prefer to dance with young Patterson?" "No," she admitted as he took her in his arms for another waltz. "But your timing was rather deliberate, wasn't it?" A smile played at the corners of Zachary's mouth. "A marshal learns to recognize trouble before it starts. And Mr. Patterson represents trouble, for me, potentially." The admission hung between them as they danced, neither quite ready to acknowledge its full meaning. But something had shifted, a door opened that couldn't easily be closed again. As the evening wound down, Zachary walked Abigail back to the store, the streets of Albuquerque quiet under a blanket of stars. They moved slowly, neither in a hurry to end the night. "Thank you for escorting me to the festival," Abigail said as they reached the store's entrance. "I had a wonderful time, as did I." Zachary hesitated, then added, "I'm riding out tomorrow to deliver a prisoner to Santa Fe. I'll be gone about a week." "Oh," Abigail couldn't quite hide her disappointment. "Well, safe travels. I was wondering." He paused, uncharacteristically uncertain. "Would it be all right if I called on you when I return? Properly, I mean." Abigail's heart quickened. "Properly? For supper, perhaps, or a ride on Sunday afternoon." He met her eyes directly. "As more than neighbors or friends, if you'd be amenable." A smile bloomed across Abigail's face. "I'd be very amenable, Marshal Zimmerman." Zachary took her hand, his touch sending warmth up her arm. "Until I return, then." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles before releasing it. The gesture, old-fashioned and courtly, touched Abigail deeply. "Until then," she whispered. She watched him walk away, her hand still tingling where his lips had touched it, a sense of anticipation building within her for what might come next. The week of Zachary's absence dragged interminably for Abigail. She threw herself into work, taking inventory, reorganizing displays, and visiting suppliers to introduce herself. The store kept her busy during the day, but evenings stretched long and quiet in the apartment above. She found herself thinking of Zachary constantly, his steadfast presence, his quiet humor, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. Their relationship had evolved so gradually that she hadn't recognized how central he'd become to her new life until his absence left such a noticeable void. On the sixth day, a fierce autumn storm blew in from the mountains, bringing driving rain and winds that rattled the store's windows. Abigail closed early, lighting a fire in the apartment's small hearth, and settling in with a book Zachary had loaned her weeks ago, a volume of poetry by Walt Whitman that she'd been saving for a quiet evening. The pounding on the store's door came just as she was considering retiring for the night. Wrapping a shawl around her shoulders, Abigail descended the stairs, lamp in hand. Through the rain-streaked window, she could make out a drenched figure on the porch. "Who is it?" she called, caution making her hesitate before unlocking the door. "Abigail, it's me." Zachary's voice sent her fumbling with the lock. She pulled the door open to find him standing there, soaked to the skin, his hat doing little to keep the rain from his face. "You're back early," she said, stepping aside to let him in, "and thoroughly drenched. Come upstairs by the fire before you catch your death." He followed her up to the apartment, removing his hat and coat in the small entryway. Even with those items gone, his clothes clung to him, water dripping onto the floor. "I'm sorry to arrive in such a state," he said, running a hand through his wet hair. "The storm caught us on the road. We made better time than expected on the journey out, so I decided to push through rather than wait it out." "You must be freezing," Abigail said, noting the slight tremble in his hands. "I'll put on some coffee, and I think I still have some of Uncle Walter's clothes. They might fit you well enough until yours dry." She busied herself with the coffee pot while Zachary changed in Walter's old bedroom. When he emerged, wearing her uncle's flannel shirt and woolen trousers that were slightly too short, Abigail couldn't help but smile. "Not quite your usual imposing figure, Marshal," she teased, handing him a steaming cup. "I'll survive the blow to my dignity," he replied with a wry smile, settling into the chair closest to the fire. "It's worth it to be warm and dry." Abigail took the chair opposite, suddenly aware of the intimacy of the situation, the two of them alone in her apartment, late at night with rain lashing at the windows. It was hardly proper, but she couldn't bring herself to care. "How was your journey?" she asked. "Did you deliver your prisoner without incident?" "Mostly," Zachary said, sipping his coffee. "Though he tried to make a run for it outside Las Lunas, didn't get far." His eyes found hers over the rim of his cup. "And how was your week? The store keeping you busy?" "Very, though I missed." She hesitated, then finished honestly, "I missed our conversations." Something softened in Zachary's expression. "As did I, more than I expected." The admission hung between them, weighted with meaning. Abigail set down her cup, gathering courage. "You mentioned calling on me properly when you returned," she said. "Is that why you braved the storm tonight?" Zachary leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Partly, but mostly I just couldn't wait another day to see you." He ran a hand through his still damp hair, an uncharacteristically nervous gesture. "Abigail, I'm not a man who speaks easily about feelings. My position requires a certain reserve, and my nature tends toward the same. But this past week, being away, I've come to realize something I can no longer keep to myself." Abigail's heart thundered in her chest. "And what is that?" "That you've become essential to me," he said simply. "That I think of you first thing when I wake and last thing before I sleep. That seeing you at the end of a long day makes everything worthwhile." He looked directly into her eyes. "In short, that I've fallen in love with you." The words, spoken plainly and without flourish, moved Abigail more than any poetic declaration could have. This was Zachary, straightforward, honest, saying exactly what he meant. "I've fallen in love with you too," she replied, her voice steady despite the emotion behind the words. "It wasn't what I expected when I came west, but I can't imagine my life here without you in it." Zachary reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. I don't have much to offer beyond myself. The marshal's pay is modest and the work is dangerous at times, but if you'd consider a future together." Abigail squeezed his hand. "I have the store. Between us, we'd manage very well. And as for danger, life offers no guarantees, Zachary. We both know that." He stood then, drawing her up with him until they faced each other beside the crackling fire. Slowly, giving her every chance to step away, he raised a hand to her cheek, his touch gentle against her skin. "May I kiss you, Abigail?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. In answer, she leaned forward, pressing her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, then deepened as Zachary's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer. Abigail's hands found their way to his shoulders, feeling the solid strength of him beneath the borrowed shirt. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Zachary rested his forehead against hers. "I should go," he said reluctantly, "before I completely compromise your reputation." "Stay," Abigail replied impulsively. "Not," she flushed, realizing the implication. "I meant the storm is still raging and the boarding house is all the way across town. You can sleep in Uncle Walter's room." Zachary smiled, pressing another quick kiss to her lips. "Then I'll stay, but I'll be gone before the town wakes. And Abigail," his expression grew serious again, "I want to do this properly. Court you as you deserve, if you'll give me that chance." "I will," she promised. "Though I think we're well beyond the initial stages of courtship already." His laugh was warm and genuine. "Perhaps, but some traditions are worth honoring." True to his word, Zachary began courting Abigail with a formality that might have seemed old-fashioned if it weren't so endearing. He called at the store with flowers, escorted her to church on Sundays, and took her on proper outings, picnics in the foothills when weather permitted, dinners at the hotel restaurant, even a theatrical performance when a traveling company passed through town. The townspeople observed this development with knowing smiles and approving nods. Marshal Zimmerman had been respected, but somewhat isolated in the community before Abigail's arrival. Seeing him visibly happier, more engaged, only increased the general goodwill toward the couple. As November turned to December, Albuquerque prepared for Christmas. Abigail, determined to honor her uncle's tradition of making the store a hub for holiday celebrations, decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons. She organized a toy drive for the orphanage in Santa Fe and convinced local craftspeople to display their wares for holiday shoppers. Zachary watched her transformation from uncertain newcomer to confident businesswoman with undisguised pride. "Walter would be amazed at what you've accomplished," he told her one evening as they closed up the store together, something that had become a near nightly ritual. "I hope so," Abigail said, straightening a display of handmade quilts. "Sometimes I feel him here, you know. Especially when the store is full of people, everyone talking and laughing. I think he'd approve." "I know he would." Zachary hesitated, then added, "I have something to ask you. A proper Christmas is still a few weeks away, but I can't wait any longer." The seriousness in his tone made Abigail turn to face him fully. "What is it?" Zachary reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "I had this sent from Santa Fe. It arrived today." Abigail's heart leaped as he opened the box to reveal a ring, a simple gold band set with a single, perfect pearl. "I know we haven't known each other long," Zachary said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "But I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Abigail Barton, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears welled in Abigail's eyes as she looked at the ring, then at the man holding it. The man who'd rescued her on the trail that first day, who'd stood by her through her uncle's death and her adjustment to a new life, whose strength and integrity had won her heart completely. "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly, Yes, Zachary, I will marry you. His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into an embrace that lifted her feet from the floor. Their kiss was joyful, celebratory, full of promise for the future they would build together. When he set her down, Abigail looked at the ring gleaming on her hand. It's beautiful. How did you know I prefer pearls to diamonds? You mentioned once that your mother had a pearl brooch you treasured, Zachary replied. I thought you might like to carry that memory with you. The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her deeply. When shall we be married? In the spring, sooner if you're willing, Zachary said. The circuit judge returns next week. He could perform the ceremony before Christmas. Abigail considered this. A small, practical voice reminded her that they'd known each other barely 4 months. But a stronger voice, the one that had urged her to come west in the first place, recognized that some decisions transcended conventional timelines. Yes, she decided. Before Christmas, we'll start the new year together. News of their engagement spread through Albuquerque like wildfire. Congratulations poured in from all quarters, along with offers of help for the hastily arranged wedding. Mrs. Mendoza insisted on baking the cake. Mrs. Wilson organized a group of women to decorate the church, and Mr. Chen presented them with a beautiful embroidered tablecloth as an early wedding gift. The day before the ceremony, a letter arrived for Abigail, the first correspondence she'd received from Boston since her departure. It was from Margaret Collins, her closest friend at the girls' school, responding to Abigail's account of Walter's passing and her decision to remain in New Mexico. Abigail read the letter by lamplight after closing the store, smiling at her friend's characteristic mixture of concern and curiosity. My dearest Abby, your letter arrived just as we were beginning to fear the worst. The idea of you alone in that wild territory has given me many sleepless nights. But your descriptions, both of your uncle's peaceful passing and of the town that has welcomed you, have somewhat allayed my fears. Still, I cannot help but worry. Are you truly content there, so far from civilization and everything familiar? The general store must be a tremendous responsibility. And while your marshal sounds like a fine gentleman, your description of your rescue on the trail was positively novelistic. I wonder if your isolation has perhaps hastened feelings that might develop more naturally over time in different circumstances. Forgive my frankness, dear friend, but I care too much for your happiness not to express my concerns. Remember that you always have a place here should you wish to return. With fondest affection, Margaret. Abigail set down the letter, considering her friend's well-intentioned concerns. From Margaret's perspective in Boston, Abigail's new life must seem impulsive, perhaps even reckless. The Abigail who had left 4 months ago might have agreed, but that Abigail no longer existed. In her place was a woman who had found purpose in continuing her uncle's legacy, who had discovered strengths she never knew she possessed, who had fallen deeply in love with a man whose quiet integrity matched the vast landscape he protected. Taking out pen and paper, she began her reply. My dear Margaret, thank you for your concern, which I know springs from genuine affection. But I must assure you that I have never been more certain of any decision in my life than I am of my future here in New Mexico. By the time you receive this letter, I will be Abigail Zimmerman. Zachary and I are to be married tomorrow by the circuit judge, with the entire town in attendance. It may seem sudden to you, but when one knows with absolute certainty, why wait? The store flourishes under my care, and I find I have a natural aptitude for business that was never encouraged back east. The community has embraced me as one of their own. And Zachary, my soon-to-be husband, is everything I could wish for in a partner: steadfast, honorable, and possessed of a quiet strength that complements my own determination. This is not a story of a woman settling for the first available option in a strange place. It is the story of a woman who traveled west seeking independence and found, to her surprise, that independence and love are not mutually exclusive when the right partner appears. I miss you, dear friend, and would be delighted if someday you might visit us here. The West is not the uncivilized wilderness many Easterners imagine. It is beautiful, challenging, and above all, honest, much like the man I am about to marry. With love and gratitude for your friendship, Abigail. She had just sealed the letter when a knock came at the door. Knowing Zachary's distinctive pattern, she hurried to answer it. He stood on the threshold, hat in hand, looking uncharacteristically nervous. I know it's bad luck to see the bride before the wedding, but I wanted to bring you something. From behind his back, he produced a small wooden box, intricately carved with a pattern of leaves and vines. I've been working on this for weeks. Not much of a craftsman, I'm afraid, but I wanted you to have something made by my hands. Abigail took the box, running her fingers over the carefully worked wood. Inside, lined with soft velvet, was a space perfectly sized for her mother's silver locket and other small treasures. "It's beautiful," she said, genuinely moved by the gift and the thought behind it. "I'll treasure it always." Zachary smiled, visibly relieved. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice soft with promise, "tomorrow you'll be my wife." "And you'll be my husband," Abigail replied, the words filling her with quiet joy. He kissed her then, a gentle kiss that held the promise of all their tomorrows. When they parted, he touched her cheek one last time before stepping back. "Until tomorrow, Abigail Barton." "Until tomorrow, Marshal Zimmerman." She watched him walk away down the darkened street, her heart full to bursting with love and anticipation for the life they would build together. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, the December sun bright in a cloudless sky. Abigail dressed in her finest gown, a deep blue silk she'd brought from Boston, now altered by Mrs. Mendoza's skilled hands to better suit current fashions. Her mother's locket hung around her neck, and her hair was arranged in a simple but elegant style, adorned with white flowers from Mrs. Wilson's hothouse. The church was filled to capacity, the pews crowded with townspeople and visitors from outlying ranches. Zachary stood at the altar, resplendent in a new black suit, his badge polished to a shine on his chest. When Abigail entered on Mr. Chen's arm, the elderly shopkeeper having volunteered to give her away in Walter's absence, a hush fell over the gathering. The ceremony itself was brief but heartfelt. Judge Harrison, a gruff but sentimental man who had known Zachary for years, conducted the proceedings with surprising tenderness. When it came time for the vows, Zachary's strong voice carried clearly through the church. "I, Zachary James Zimmerman, take you, Abigail Elizabeth Barton, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to protect and cherish you all the days of my life, to stand by your side in joy and in sorrow, in plenty and in want, in sickness and in health, as long as we both shall live." Abigail's voice trembled slightly with emotion as she repeated her own vows, but her eyes never left Zachary's face, drawing strength from the love she saw reflected there. "By the power vested in me by the territory of New Mexico," Judge Harrison proclaimed, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride, Marshal." Zachary needed no further encouragement. His kiss was tender but thorough, prompting cheers and applause from the assembled guests. When they finally broke apart, both flushed and smiling, he whispered, "Mrs. Zimmerman," with such satisfaction that Abigail couldn't help but laugh with pure joy. The celebration that followed at the hotel was the most festive event Albuquerque had seen in years. Tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by nearly every household in town. Music filled the air as people danced and sang, toasting the new couple with genuine affection. "Your uncle would be so proud," Martha Jenkins told Abigail during a quiet moment. "He always worried about leaving you alone in the world. To see you so happy, with a good man by your side and the whole town embracing you, it would have given him great peace." Tears pricked Abigail's eyes at the mention of Walter. "I wish he could have been here." "He is, dear," Martha said, patting her hand, "in his own way." As the evening drew to a close, Zachary led Abigail up the stairs to the hotel's finest room, which the owner had insisted on providing for their wedding night. The space was modest by Eastern standards but luxurious for Albuquerque: a large bed with a handmade quilt, a small sitting area with a crackling fire, and a window overlooking the town's main street. "Well, Mrs. Zimmerman," Zachary said as he closed the door behind them, suddenly shy despite the months of courtship. "Here we are. Here we are," Abigail agreed, equally nervous despite her certainty about their match. This was a threshold of another kind, one that would truly bind them together as husband and wife. Zachary crossed to where she stood, taking her hands in his. "I want you to know something," he said earnestly. "I may not be a man of many words or grand gestures, but my love for you runs deeper than anything I've ever felt. When those men tried to rob you on the trail that day, I had no idea I was meeting the woman who would change my life forever. Nor did I imagine my rescuer would become my husband," Abigail replied softly. "But looking back, I think perhaps I began falling in love with you even then, when you appeared like some avenging angel on that ridge." Zachary laughed, drawing her closer. "Hardly an angel, just a man doing his job." "My hero all the same," she whispered, raising her face for his kiss. Their first night as husband and wife was everything Abigail had hoped for: tender, passionate, a true union of bodies and hearts. In Zachary's arms, she found a sense of belonging she'd never known, a completion that transcended physical pleasure. Later, as they lay entwined beneath the quilt, watching snowflakes begin to drift past the window, Abigail realized something with perfect clarity. Her journey west had never been just about escaping a stifling life in Boston or claiming her uncle's legacy. It had been about finding this man, this love, this future that now stretched before them like the vast New Mexico sky, boundless with possibility. "What are you thinking?" Zachary asked, his voice drowsy as he traced patterns on her bare shoulder. "That this is only the beginning," Abigail replied, nestling closer to his warmth. "The first chapter of our story together." "The best story," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her hair. "And one that's going to last a very long time." Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing Albuquerque in pristine white, a clean slate for the new year, for their new life, for all the joy and challenges that lay ahead for Marshal and Mrs. Zimmerman. Spring came early to New Mexico that year. By March, wildflowers carpeted the foothills around Albuquerque, and the Rio Grande ran high with snowmelt from the mountains. Abigail and Zachary settled into married life with a naturalness that surprised even them, their separate routines intertwining into a shared existence that strengthened them both. They had converted the apartment above the store into their home, expanding into the storage room to create a proper bedroom and study. Each morning, Zachary would rise before dawn for his rounds, returning for breakfast with Abigail before she opened the store. In the evenings, if his duties permitted, he would help her close up, often bringing news and gossip from around the territory that kept her connected to the wider world beyond Albuquerque's boundaries. The store flourished under Abigail's management. Building on her uncle's foundation, She expanded the inventory to include books, high-quality tools, and an impressive selection of fabrics that drew customers from as far away as Santa Fe. Her natural head for figures and Walter's meticulous record-keeping system allowed her to extend credit wisely, helping families through hard times without endangering the business. Zachary, meanwhile, had earned a reputation throughout the territory as a marshal of unwavering integrity. His fair but firm approach to law enforcement made him respected by honest citizens and feared by those with criminal intentions. The incident with the three would-be robbers had spread far and wide, further cementing his status. Their happiness seemed complete, yet by late spring, Abigail began to suspect that their family might soon grow. She kept the suspicion to herself at first, waiting until she was certain before sharing the news with Zachary. The opportunity came on a warm evening in May, when Zachary returned from a 3-day journey to a distant ranch where rustlers had been causing trouble. Abigail had prepared his favorite meal, venison stew with dumplings, followed by apple pie, and set the table with their best dishes. "This is quite a welcome," Zachary remarked as he washed up for dinner, noticing the special preparations. "Did something happen while I was away?" "Nothing yet," Abigail replied mysteriously, "but something will around Christmas if Dr. Jenkins is correct." Zachary paused, towel in hand, as her meaning dawned on him. "Abigail, are you saying?" She nodded, unable to contain her smile. "We're going to have a baby, Zachary. I'm about 2 months along, according to the doctor." The towel dropped forgotten as Zachary crossed the room in 2 long strides, gathering her into his arms with a whoop of joy that startled even himself. He lifted her off her feet, spinning her around before setting her down gently, suddenly concerned. "Should I not do that? Will it harm the baby?" Abigail laughed, touching his worried face. "I'm not made of porcelain, my love. Dr. Jenkins says I'm in excellent health, and there's no reason to treat me like an invalid, though I may take you up on that offer in a few months when I'm as big as a house." Zachary's hand moved to rest on her still flat stomach, wonder and awe in his expression. "Our child," he whispered. "I never thought. That is, I hoped someday, but so soon." "Are you pleased, then?" Abigail asked, though his reaction had already answered the question. "Pleased doesn't begin to describe it," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Overjoyed, terrified, grateful beyond words." He kissed her then, pouring all those feelings into the embrace. When they finally separated, both breathless, he added, "I love you, Abigail Zimmerman. More than I ever thought possible." "And I love you," she replied, resting her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Our child will be born into so much love." The news of Abigail's pregnancy spread through Albuquerque with predictable speed. The women of the town rallied around her, offering advice, hand-me-down baby items, and promises of help when the time came. Martha Jenkins appointed herself unofficial guardian of Abigail's health, bringing nutritious foods and herbal teas said to ease the discomforts of pregnancy. Zachary, for his part, became even more protective, though he tried to hide it behind a facade of casual concern. He arranged for young Tom Wilson's son to help in the store so Abigail wouldn't have to lift heavy items, and he began turning down assignments that would take him far from town for extended periods. "You can't neglect your duties because of me," Abigail protested one evening when he declined a request to track rustlers near the Arizona border. "I'm perfectly capable of managing while you're away." "I know you are," Zachary replied, pulling her close, "but I don't want to miss any part of this." His hand rested on her growing belly, where the baby had recently begun to make its presence known with small, fluttering movements. "Besides, Deputy Garcia needs the experience. It'll be good for him to handle some cases independently." As summer turned to fall, Abigail's body changed dramatically. Her slender frame now supported a substantial curve that made customers smile and strangers offer congratulations. Despite occasional discomfort and fatigue, she continued working in the store until November, when Zachary finally convinced her to reduce her hours. "The baby will be here in a month," he reasoned. "You need to rest while you can." Reluctantly, Abigail agreed, turning more responsibilities over to young James Wilson, who had proven himself a capable assistant. She used her newfound free time to prepare for the baby, sewing tiny garments and transforming the small room off their bedroom into a nursery. Christmas approached, bringing with it anticipation of a different kind than the previous year. Their first anniversary would coincide, more or less, with the birth of their child, a fitting gift, they agreed, for a union that had brought them both such happiness. 2 weeks before Christmas, a fierce snowstorm descended on Albuquerque, blanketing the town in white and making travel nearly impossible. Zachary, who had been visiting a neighboring settlement, barely made it home before the trails became impassable. "I was afraid you'd be stranded," Abigail said as he stamped snow from his boots at their door. "Dr. Jenkins says the baby could come any day now." "Wild horses couldn't keep me away," Zachary assured her, embracing her awkwardly around her enormous belly. "How are you feeling?" "Like I'm carrying a future bronc rider," she replied with a tired smile. "Your son or daughter has been practicing for the rodeo all day." Zachary placed his hand on her stomach, feeling the powerful kicks. "Strong like their mother," he said proudly. That night, as they lay in bed listening to the wind howl around the eaves, Abigail felt the first twinges of what she suspected were real labor pains. She said nothing, not wanting to alarm Zachary prematurely, but by morning, there was no mistaking what was happening. "It's time," she told him calmly as he prepared to leave for his morning rounds. "You'd better fetch Dr. Jenkins." The next hours passed in a blur of pain and determination for Abigail. The doctor arrived promptly, snow still clinging to his coat, and Martha Jenkins followed shortly after with clean linens and experienced hands. Zachary, initially banished to the store below as was customary during childbirth, refused to stay away, insisting on remaining at his wife's side throughout her ordeal. "Not conventional," Dr. Jenkins muttered, but he didn't press the point when he saw the determination in the marshal's eyes. Zachary proved a steadying presence, holding Abigail's hand through contractions, wiping her brow, and murmuring encouragement when her strength flagged. As the hours wore on and the labor intensified, Abigail drew comfort from his unwavering support. "I can't do this," she gasped during a particularly brutal contraction. "You can," Zachary insisted, his voice firm but gentle. "You're the strongest person I know, Abigail. Our child is almost here, just a little longer." As the winter afternoon darkened into evening, Abigail gave one final, tremendous push, and their son entered the world with a lusty cry that testified to his healthy lungs. Dr. Jenkins cleaned and swaddled the infant before placing him in his mother's arms. "He's perfect," Abigail whispered, tears streaming down her face as she counted tiny fingers and toes. "Look what we made, Zachary." Zachary, unashamed of his own tears, gently touched his son's dark head. "He has your chin," he observed, his voice thick with emotion. "And your determination, I'd wager, getting here in the middle of a snowstorm." They named him Walter James Zimmerman Walter, for Abigail's uncle who had made their meeting possible, and James for Zachary's brother back east. Young Walter had his father's blue eyes and his mother's chestnut hair, a perfect blend of them both. News of the birth spread quickly through snowbound Albuquerque. Despite the weather, Visitors trudged through drifts to offer congratulations and gifts for the new arrival. The store remained closed for a week as the little family adjusted to their new reality. But Zachary hung a sign announcing the birth and promising to reopen after the new year. On Christmas morning, their first anniversary, Zachary presented Abigail with a silver bracelet engraved with their wedding date on one side and Walter's birth date on the other. "For the two most important days of my life," he explained as he fastened it around her wrist. "The day you became my wife and the day you made me a father." Abigail, nursing their son by the fire, looked up at her husband with eyes full of love. "When those men tried to rob me on the trail last year, I was terrified, but now I almost want to thank them. If they hadn't threatened me, you might never have appeared on that ridge and none of this would have happened." Zachary sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders as he gazed down at their son. "I'd have found you somehow," he said with quiet certainty. "Some things are meant to be, Abigail. And we were meant to find each other, to build this life together." As they sat before the fire, their tiny son sleeping peacefully between them, Abigail knew he was right. From Boston to Albuquerque, from danger to safety, from strangers to lovers to family, their journey had been guided by something larger than chance. "Merry Christmas, Mrs. Zimmerman," Zachary murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Merry Christmas, Marshal," she replied, leaning into his strength. "Here's to many, many more." Outside, the snow continued to fall on Albuquerque, but within the walls of their home above the general store, all was warmth and light and love, the greatest gift of all. 5 years later, Abigail stood on the porch of their new house on the edge of town, watching as Zachary taught young Walter how to ride his pony in the fenced yard. Beside her, 3-year-old Elizabeth, named for Abigail's mother, played with her rag doll, occasionally looking up to cheer her brother's achievements. The move from the apartment above the store had been necessary when Elizabeth arrived, their growing family requiring more space than the modest rooms could provide. Zachary had surprised Abigail with the plot of land on her 26th birthday, and they'd spent the next year building a home that combined the best of Eastern comfort with Western practicality, a sprawling ranch house with large windows to capture the magnificent views of the mountains. The store continued to prosper under Abigail's direction, though she now shared management responsibilities with James Wilson, who had proven himself an invaluable partner in the business. This arrangement allowed her more time with the children while keeping her hand in the work she loved. Zachary, meanwhile, had been appointed chief marshal for the entire district, a position that acknowledged his reputation for fairness and effectiveness. The promotion meant less time in the saddle and more administrative duties, a change he sometimes grumbled about but ultimately appreciated as it kept him closer to home. "Look, Mama," Walter called, his small face alight with pride as he guided his pony in a circle without help. "I'm riding like Papa." "Wonderful, darling," Abigail called back, her heart swelling at the sight of her son's joy and her husband's obvious pride. At 5, Walter was already showing signs of the man he would become, thoughtful like his father, but with Abigail's quick mind and curiosity. Elizabeth tugged at her skirt. "Up, please," the little girl requested, raising her arms. With her golden curls and blue eyes, she was the image of her father, though her determined personality mirrored Abigail's own. Abigail lifted her daughter, settling her on her hip as they continued to watch the riding lesson. "Your turn next year," she promised, kissing Elizabeth's plump cheek. "When you're a bit bigger." "Now," Elizabeth insisted, her favorite word these days. "Patience, little one," Abigail laughed. "Some things are worth waiting for." As twilight descended on their homestead, Zachary led the pony back to its small stable, Walter walking proudly at his side. The family gathered on the porch, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "Letter came for you today," Zachary mentioned, handing Abigail an envelope bearing a Boston postmark. "From your friend Margaret." Abigail broke the seal eagerly. Margaret's letters, though infrequent, were always welcome connections to her former life. "She's finally coming to visit," she announced after scanning the contents. "Next spring. She says she's been saving for the journey for years and can't put it off any longer. She wants to meet the infamous Marshal Zimmerman and the children I've heard so much about." "Infamous, am I?" Zachary chuckled, settling into the porch swing with Elizabeth on his lap. "Should I be concerned about what you've been writing to your Boston friend?" "Only the most flattering descriptions," Abigail assured him, joining them on the swing. "Though I may have embellished your heroics that first day on the trail. For dramatic effect. 3 outlaws becoming 6 in the telling," he teased. "Perhaps," she admitted with a smile. "But the heart of the story remains true. 3 men tried to rob me. A handsome marshal appeared and they rode off empty-handed. The best part, however, falling in love with my rescuer needs no embellishment." Walter, who had been listening intently, looked up from his spot on the porch steps. "Tell the story again, Mama." "About how you and Papa met." "You've heard it 100 times," Abigail said, though she never tired of telling it. "Please," Walter pleaded, his blue eyes so like his father's wide with anticipation. "Very well," she acquiesced, drawing her son closer. "It was a hot summer day, and I was traveling alone on the trail to Albuquerque." As Abigail recounted the tale of their meeting, Zachary's arm tightened around her shoulders, his expression softening with memory. The children listened raptly, though they could probably recite the story themselves by now, interrupting occasionally with favorite details they feared she might omit. When she finished, Walter sighed contentedly. "And you lived happily ever after," he concluded, the traditional ending he insisted upon. "We are," Zachary confirmed, looking at his wife with the same admiration and love that had been there from the beginning. "Every single day." As darkness fell completely, they moved inside to the warmth of their home. The children were tucked into bed with stories and kisses, and finally, Abigail and Zachary found themselves alone by the fire as they had on so many nights over the years. "Any regrets?" Zachary asked quietly, his fingers entwined with hers. "About staying in Albuquerque, about the life we've built." Abigail considered the question seriously, as she always did when he asked it, which was rarely, but always at significant moments, as if reassuring himself that she was truly content with the path they'd chosen. "Not a single one," she replied truthfully. "Every day, I'm grateful for those 3 would-be robbers who thought I'd be easy prey. Without them, I might never have met my Marshal." Zachary laughed, pulling her closer for a kiss that, even after 6 years of marriage, still made her heart race. "Then I suppose we owe them a debt of gratitude," he murmured against her lips. "Though I still maintain I'd have found you somehow." "Perhaps," Abigail agreed, settling against his chest, "but I prefer our story just as it happened." Outside, the vast New Mexico sky spread like a canopy of stars above their home, the same stars that had witnessed their first meeting, their wedding, the births of their children. Within these walls lay everything Abigail had ever wanted but never known to seek, not just independence and purpose, but a love that had transformed her life in ways she could never have imagined that day on the trail. "I love you, Abigail Zimmerman," Zachary whispered, his voice holding the same wonder it had the first time he'd said those words. "And I love you, my Marshal," she replied, secure in the knowledge that their happily ever after was not just a story ending but a continuing reality, one they created anew with each passing day in the life they'd built together under the wide, open skies of New Mexico.